Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. I came home early that Friday. Work had been slow, and for the first time in months, I wanted to surprise Sophie with dinner. As I walked through the front door, I felt the usual comfort of home wash over me, the soft hum of the fridge, the smell of her favorite lavender candle still lingering in the air. I tossed my keys on the counter, fully expecting to find Sophie in the living room or kitchen. But what I found was something entirely different. There, on our bed, was an open suitcase. The sight of it sent a jolt through my system, though I didn't know why at first. Maybe it was the fact that it was the expensive suitcase we bought for our honeymoon, now half filled with carefully packed clothes. As I stepped closer, my eyes caught a piece of paper lying on top. I picked it up. It was a flight itinerary. Las Vegas. I blinked. The flight was for tomorrow, and it was one way. There were two names listed, Sophie Daniels and Frank Miller. Frank Miller. Her boss. The name hit me like a punch in the gut. It was surreal, the kind of thing you read about in books or see in movies. Not something that happens to you. I stared at the ticket, trying to make sense of it, but the answer was already clear. There was no business trip. No work event. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She was planning to leave me for him. I heard the front door creak open and felt my chest tighten as Sophie walked in. She was carrying groceries, humming softly to herself, her keys jingling as she tossed them onto the side table. When she turned the corner and saw me standing by the suitcase, her face paled, the bag of groceries slipping from her hand. An apple rolled across the floor, but neither of us moved. Mark, her voice was small, fragile, as if she didn't know what to say. Her eyes flicked from my face to the flight confirmation in my hand, and I could see the panic rise in her. I held up the paper, my hand trembling. Care to explain this? My voice was calm, too calm, like the moment before a storm. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Mark, she began, but I cut her off. Are you leaving me? The words felt foreign in my mouth, like they didn't belong to me. I still wasn't sure this was real. She swallowed hard and took a deep breath, setting the groceries on the counter, trying to regain control. It's not what you think, she said, though the guilt in her voice betrayed her. I didn't want you to find out this way. My grip on the ticket tightened. Find out what, Sophie? That you're running off to Vegas with your boss. She flinched at the sharpness of my words, but she didn't deny it. The silence that followed was deafening. We weren't. I wasn't going to leave you, she said finally, her voice breaking. It's just. I need time to think. Things have been so hard between us lately, Mark, and Frank, he was there. Frank was there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Frank is the one you turn to when things are hard. Not me. Not your husband. She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched as if to offer comfort, but I stepped back. I couldn't stand the thought of her touching me. Not after this. It's not that simple, she said, her voice cracking. It didn't mean to happen, but Frank, he understands me in ways that you don't, I said, my voice rising as anger surged through me. Don't you dare tell me he understands you better than I do. I've been with you for 8 years, Sophie. We've built a life together. You don't get to throw that away for some fling with your boss. It's not a fling, she whispered, tears finally spilling over. It's more than that. I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on my chest. So, what? You love him. She wiped her eyes, unable to look at me, and in that moment, I knew. I knew the answer before she said it. I don't know, she finally admitted, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. I think I might. I couldn't breathe. It was as if someone had punched me in the stomach, knocking the air out of my lungs. The room spun, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. So, what was the plan? I asked, my voice low and bitter. You just go off to Vegas with him, and I'm supposed to sit here and wait? Or were you planning to send me a postcard telling me it's over? She shook her head, her sobs coming in gasps now. No, Mark, I wasn't going to leave you. I needed time to figure things out. Figure things out? I repeated, incredulous. And you thought the best way to do that was by flying to Vegas with him? Her shoulders shook as she sobbed, but I felt nothing. I should have felt something, anger, sadness, betrayal, but in that moment, I was numb. I never wanted to hurt you, she said through her tears. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Well, it did, Sophie, I snapped, my voice cold and distant. It happened. And now what? You expect me to just forget all of this? She didn't respond, only stood there, broken and fragile, the weight of her actions crashing down on both of us. I stared at her, my wife, the woman I thought I knew, wondering when she had become a stranger to me. That night, our home felt like a shell, a hollow echo of the life we once shared. I paced the kitchen, the dull thrum of my thoughts drumming against my skull. I poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling in the glass like the chaos in my mind. Each sip burned as it slid down my throat, but the heat was a welcome distraction from the cold reality of Sophie's betrayal. Sophie sat at the dining table, her hands clasped in her lap, her face pale under the soft glow of the overhead light. I glanced over, the sight of her breaking my heart all over again. She looked small, lost in the expansive space of the room that once felt so welcoming. I wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer the woman I had married. Mark, she said softly, her voice trembling. Can we talk about this? Talk. I repeated, my voice edged with bitterness. What is there to talk about, Sophie? You're leaving me for another man. That seems pretty clear. I never wanted to hurt you, she pleaded, tears pooling in her eyes. This wasn't planned. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms defensively. But it did, didn't it? You let it get that far, Sophie. You chose to ignore our problems and run to him. She flinched at my words, and I could see the guilt washing over her. I know I messed up. I'm sorry. I was confused and lonely. It felt like you were pulling away from me, and Frank was he was there. He listened to me, because he wanted something from you, I shot back, the hurt bubbling to the surface. He doesn't care about you like I do. He's using you, and you're too blinded by your feelings to see it. Sophie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Don't you dare make this about him. I messed up, I know that. But you can't act like you've been perfect either, Mark. You've been distant. We've both changed. I never cheated on you, I said, the bitterness lacing my words. I've been here, trying to work through our issues. You're the one who turned to someone else. A heavy silence fell between us, the tension crackling in the air. I could see the frustration building in her eyes, and it mirrored the turmoil inside me. Maybe if we had talked more, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. If I had felt like I could talk to you without judgment, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Maybe if you valued our marriage, you wouldn't have sought comfort in another man, I countered, the words spilling from my lips before I could stop them. Her expression crumbled, and she sank back into her chair, the fight leaving her. I know. I'm so sorry, Mark. I don't expect you to forgive me right now. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. Fix this? I echoed, incredulous. You think we can just magically go back to the way things were after this? I don't know. But I want to try, she pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. I love you, Mark. I always have. Love isn't enough, I replied coldly. You've shattered my trust, and that's not something that just gets fixed with a few apologies. I know it's going to take time, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. But please. I can't lose you. I turned away, unable to look at her. I felt my heart hardening, a protective shell forming around the vulnerability she had exploited. "You already have," I whispered, feeling the weight of the words settle in the space between us. The next hour felt like an eternity. We sat in silence, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved pain. I poured myself another drink, hoping to numb the ache that had settled deep in my chest. "Mark," she said finally, her voice trembling. "What if I just..." "Don't," I interrupted, raising my hand. "Don't say anything else. I can't hear it right now." She nodded, understanding dawning on her face, but it did little to alleviate the tension. The hours dragged on, the shadows of the room growing deeper as night fell, yet I remained wide awake, the reality of our shattered marriage pressing down on me. I watched Sophie through the corner of my eye, her shoulders shaking as she wept quietly. I felt a pang of sorrow for the woman I had loved for so long, but it was overshadowed by the betrayal that had turned our life together into a nightmare. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and walked to the bedroom, needing distance from the pain. The memory of our life together felt like a heavy weight, suffocating me. I shut the door behind me, but the silence that followed only magnified the chaos in my mind. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that our love was slipping away, irrevocably damaged by choices that could never be undone. The darkness wrapped around me, and for the first time, I felt completely and utterly alone. Morning arrived with an oppressive heaviness in the air. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows that danced across the walls, but I felt none of the warmth. I rolled out of bed, a ghost of a man, and made my way to the kitchen, the smell of brewed coffee failing to provide any comfort. My mind was still clouded from last night's revelations, and each sip felt like swallowing glass. Sophie was already up, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, eyes puffy and red from crying. She stood by the sink, washing dishes as if the repetitive motion could scrub away the mistakes of the past few days. I could hear the clinking of plates and the rush of water, but it all felt distant, like background noise to the chaotic symphony of my thoughts. "Morning," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. I responded with a curt nod, not trusting myself to speak. The air between us was thick with unspoken words and lingering resentment. As I leaned against the counter, my eyes caught a glimpse of the suitcase still sitting in the corner, half-packed and ominous, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. "Mark," Sophie said, turning to face me, her hands still dripping with soapy water. "Can we talk about what happened yesterday? I want to find a way to fix this." I held up my hand, stopping her. "We can't fix this, Sophie. Not now, not after what you've done." My voice was colder than I intended, but the hurt ran too deep. She opened her mouth to protest, but I continued, my frustration boiling over. "You say you love me, but you were ready to throw it all away. You were going to run off to Las Vegas with Frank. How do you expect me to just forget that?" "I know I messed up, and I'm sorry," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought we were falling apart. I thought I was lost." "Lost?" I scoffed. "You didn't even try to find your way back to me. You ran in the opposite direction." Sophie's shoulders slumped as she stared at the ground, shame etched on her face. "What do you want me to say?" "I can't change the past, but I want to fight for us. I'll do whatever it takes." "Fight for us?" I echoed, incredulous. "You can't just erase what happened. You've shattered my trust, Sophie. You've destroyed everything we built together." As the words left my mouth, a thought struck me like a lightning bolt. I had to take a stand, to symbolize the end of the life we had created together, a life that now felt like a farce. "I need to do something." "What do you mean?" she asked, confusion flickering across her features. I walked toward the small storage closet in the hallway, throwing it open and rummaging through the clutter. My hand brushed against something cold and heavy, a small wooden box I had once used for keepsakes. I pulled it out, a grim smile playing at the corners of my lips. "I'm going to build a coffin," I said, my voice steady. A coffin? Sophie's eyes widened, her face draining of color. What are you talking about? Not a literal one, I clarified, though part of me wished I could bury the memories of our marriage in the ground. But I'm going to create a symbol. A coffin for our marriage license. I need to nail it shut to show that it's over. Mark, no, she cried, stepping closer, her hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. Please don't do this. It doesn't have to be the end, it already is. I snapped, frustration boiling over. You chose him. You chose to betray me. You can't just come back and expect everything to be fine. Sophie's face crumpled, and tears filled her eyes again. I know I've hurt you. I can't take it back, but please, don't do this. Don't end it like this. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in the anger bubbling inside me. What do you want me to do, Sophie? Pretend it didn't happen? That everything is okay? Because it's not. I can't look at you without thinking about what you did. She stepped back, her expression shifting from desperation to resolve. If you need to build this coffin to symbolize your pain, then do it. But understand that I'm still here, and I want to fight for us. Fight for what? I shot back, my voice laced with bitterness. For a marriage that's already dead. How do you fight for something that doesn't exist anymore? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she turned away, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I felt a pang of guilt at the sight of her, but it was quickly drowned by the overwhelming wave of betrayal. I walked back to the kitchen table, where our marriage license lay like a specter of what we used to have. I picked it up, the paper feeling heavy in my hands, and laid it on the table. The thought of nailing it into a coffin, a final, harsh farewell, seemed to wrap around me like a vice. Sophie watched me, her face a mix of sorrow and determination. Mark, please. You're not just burying a piece of paper. You're burying our memories, our life together. You have to think about what this means. I've thought about it, I replied, my voice cold. And I can't pretend that everything is fine anymore. I want to put this behind me. I want to move on. Then let's move on together, she begged, her voice cracking with emotion. Please, don't do this. Give us a chance to rebuild. As I stood there, the weight of her words pressed down on me, but deep down, I felt the finality of my decision solidifying. I needed this act, this symbol of closure, to acknowledge what had happened and allow me to start healing. I'm sorry, Sophie, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but I need this. I need to close this chapter. With that, I gathered the tools and materials needed to create my coffin, a small wooden box that would hold the remnants of our marriage. I worked in silence, the sound of nails biting into wood echoing around the room, each hit a physical manifestation of my pain and betrayal. As I hammered the final nail into place, I glanced up to see Sophie standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears but also an unmistakable resolve. She didn't speak, and I didn't know what to say. I felt hollow as I placed the marriage license inside the makeshift coffin, shutting the lid with a finality that resonated in my chest. This was it, the end of our story as it had been. I had buried it, and now it was time to face the reality of what came next. The days following the coffin ritual felt like an endless blur. The act of sealing away our marriage license had brought a strange mix of relief and despair. I had released the burden of the past, yet I felt a weight of regret pressing down on my chest. Each night, I lay awake, haunted by memories of happier times, wondering how we had arrived at this painful crossroads. One evening, after another day filled with silence and tension, I found myself wandering through our living room. It felt different now, stripped of warmth. The photos that once adorned the walls, snapshots of laughter, adventures, and love, seemed like a cruel reminder of what we had lost. I paused in front of a picture from our honeymoon, us grinning widely, the world at our feet. Why did you let it come to this? I whispered to the empty room, frustration rising within me. Just then, I heard the soft sound of Sophie's footsteps behind me. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light. Mark, she said quietly, can we talk? I turned, crossing my arms defensively. Talk. About what? How you were going to leave me for another man. Her eyes dropped to the floor, guilt etched across her features. No. I mean about us. About what happened. I've been thinking a lot lately. I've been thinking too, I replied, my voice tight. And honestly, I don't know if there's anything left to say. Please, she begged, taking a step closer. I just need you to listen. I realize now how much I took for granted. I let my feelings for Frank cloud my judgment, and I didn't see how much I was hurting you. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I shot back, anger bubbling up. Knowing that you were with someone else while I was here, hoping we could work through our issues? No. That's not what I mean, she said, her voice rising slightly. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. I just want to explain. I want you to understand how lost I felt. I didn't know how to reach out to you without feeling like a failure. So instead, you went to him, I retorted, shaking my head in disbelief. How does that make any sense? You had me right here, ready to fight for us. But you chose him instead. Sophie looked pained, her brow furrowed as if she were struggling to find the right words. I know I made the wrong choice, and I'm sorry. I thought he could give me what I needed, but all I did was destroy us. I've lost the best thing I ever had. I studied her, searching for any sign of the woman I had fallen in love with. Her vulnerability was palpable, but so was my anger. You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to the way it was. You broke my trust, Sophie. I know, she replied, her voice softening. But can't we try to rebuild it? I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll go to counseling, I'll change my job if it means cutting Frank out of my life. Just, don't give up on us yet. Why should I believe you? I asked, the skepticism heavy in my tone. What if this is just another empty promise? Because I'm willing to fight for you, Mark. I'm willing to fight for us. I realize now that I didn't just lose you, I lost myself in the process, she confessed, her voice trembling. I want to rediscover what we had together. The sincerity in her eyes stirred something within me, a flicker of hope wrapped in fear. I wanted to believe her, to give her a chance to make amends, but the scars of betrayal ran deep. I just don't know if I can trust you again, I admitted, my heart heavy with conflict. How do we go back from this? We start by being honest with each other, she replied earnestly. We talk. We confront the problems we've been avoiding. And if it means digging deep into the hurt, then so be it. I'm ready for that. Silence enveloped us as I considered her words. The prospect of confronting our issues filled me with dread, but I knew avoiding them wouldn't solve anything either. What if I can't forgive you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Then we'll figure it out together, she said, her determination shining through the cracks in her despair. But please don't shut me out. I can't lose you again. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision before me. I need time to process everything, I finally said, my voice steady. But I'm willing to talk. Sophie's face brightened, a glimmer of hope lighting up her features. Thank you, she said, relief flooding her voice. That's all I'm asking for. As she stepped closer, I felt the distance between us begin to shrink, but the uncertainty lingered like a shadow. I still had my doubts, my heart wrapped in a protective shell, but perhaps opening up that dialogue was the first step toward healing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. We started small, having open conversations about our feelings and fears, facing the demons we had both been running from. It wasn't easy, sometimes we argued, and other times the weight of our shared grief felt too heavy to bear. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, I couldn't help but express my unease. What if we can't rebuild? I asked, vulnerability creeping into my voice. What if we're just prolonging the inevitable? Sophie took my hand, her grip firm yet reassuring. I don't know what the future holds, Mark, but I want to try. I want to fight for us. I want to believe we can find our way back to each other. As she spoke, I felt the ice around my heart begin to crack, a hint of warmth seeping through. I want that too, I admitted, my voice steady. But I can't promise it'll be easy. Neither can I, she said softly, a bittersweet smile on her lips. But we'll face it together, whatever it is. In that moment, amidst the pain and uncertainty, I realized that perhaps we were both just a little bit lost, and that was okay. We had time to find our way back, as long as we were willing to navigate the darkness together. With each conversation, I felt a flicker of hope igniting within me. Maybe, just maybe, we could begin to heal. But deep down, I knew it would take time, effort, and a renewed commitment to each other. And though the road ahead was fraught with challenges, I found solace in the fact that we were willing to face them together, one step at a time.